I bring him up because to me, that's what another piece of the art of Vin Scully. He had an understanding of time and the significance of what was happening in its place in history, like nobody that's ever done it. And he could do like the famous broadcast of a Koufax perfect game at Dodger Stadium, where he used the clock so artfully to basically take you bit by bit, piece by piece, moment by moment through one of the greatest games ever pitched, right? And it's an iconic broadcast. I love to go back and listen to it just to remind myself of his greatness, of Vin Scully's greatness. And it's there for you to see any day you want. Is go find For Love of the Game and put it in and watch that movie and listen to him take Kevin Costner's character through his incredible performance against the Yankees in this fictional portrayal, right? And I was so lucky. One day during my 7 years with the Isotopes, Kevin Costner sat with me for several innings on the air in the booth at Isotopes Park, and I asked him about Scully and working with Vin Scully and what it was like to have Vin Scully, doing the play-by-play of his, Kevin's performance, right? And he said he told an amazing story, and the long and short of it was, how is that scripted? Where he said there was no script. He said the director tried to give Vin Scully some direction on how to do this, and Vin Scully said, "No, I read the story. I'm ready to go. Just roll." And he didn't have a script. He just did it, and he put it, and it was all about time. It was all about father time catching up, and it made me think of the Koufax, perfect game, and I just it's the pinnacle of what we aspire to in this industry. That's who Vin Scully is.
And then on the other side of it is Harry Caray, and hi, everybody. This is America Talk It Up, episode 14. I'm very fortunate today. I have two great broadcasters. My co-host, Ed Nunez, who's the voice of Western New Mexico Mustangs. But I've got the host, the voice of the Lobos, Robert Portnoy. And he's been, how many years you been doing the voice for the Lobos now? I
started in February 2013, Marty.
And I'll tell you, you've taken over some great broadcasters in the past. And in the second segment, we're going to talk about the history of the great broadcasters going back to Connie Alexander, Frank Joyce, Mike Roberts, Scott Galletti, of course, Robert Portnoy. But hey, what we want to do today, tell me how you got into broadcasting. Now, you did graduate from Stanford. Is it the Stanford Oaks? Used to be the Stanford Indians.
Yeah, Stanford Cardinal is what the nickname is. Yeah. The first broadcasting that I did was there. Their radio station is called the Zoo, KZSU, the student radio station, and that's where it started. I knew it was something I was going to get into from the time that I was a little boy. My mom used to tell the story of a grade school, what do you want to be when you grow up project that each of the kids had to do in elementary school. And I said I wanted to be a sports broadcaster and said why. And she saved that and showed it to me, many times actually. So it was probably in the cards all along. That was what I was gonna do. But it started at Stanford, and I guess the first game that I ever called was a Stanford baseball game. From the student radio station to, where I sit now with you guys today.
So did you grow up in Southern California or Northern California?
Southern California when I was a little boy. And then we moved to Phoenix, Arizona for my middle school and high school years. And that's, where my roots, I guess, are firmly planted just from the formative stages of my life. And then, I went to school in Northern California and lived there for over a decade. So, yeah.
So, I when I was a boy growing up, I would spend my 2 or 3 weeks in Long Beach, California. My grandparents lived in Long Beach. My aunt lived in Lakewood. They're in LA County in Long Beach. And I remember as a boy going to California, I would get these. I had a little, transistor. I would listen to Vince Scully and the Dodgers. And of course, I think Dick Enberg was still doing the Angels in those days.
Dick Enberg and Don Drysdale were the team. The typical story of the little kid with the radio when he was lying in bed. I mean, that's me. In fact, I still have this blue ancient classic Motorola AM radio that my parents used to listen to when they were kids. They handed down to me countless Dodger games and Angel games when I was a little boy in Southern California. Those are the guys. It was Vince Scully, Jerry Doggett, and Ross Porter with the Dodgers, and Enberg and Drysdale with the Angels. And I fell in love with the Angels. It's funny, the Dodgers were the rival for me at the time because my favorite team on that side of the league as a kid was the Reds. So the Dodgers and the Reds were in the old National League West, and I, hated the Dodgers. All the 4 great infielders that played a decade together, they were the enemy. I can name every single player from those great Dodger teams just the same way I can name every player.
Did you like Tony Perez? He was my favorite. Tony Perez for the Reds.
Doggy was unbelievable. My guy was Pete Rose. He was the player on the Reds at the time that I idled. He was the guy that seemed to get the most out of what he had and played the way that I wanted to play sports when I was a kid, all out. He was unbelievable.
Well, I'll tell you, that was a heck of a team, the Big Red Machine, Sparky Anderson, Cesar Geronimo, people of Concepcion, Don Gullett, Raleigh Eastwick. That was one heck of a team back in the day. It really was.
Johnny Bench.
I remember when they swept the Yankees in 76 4-0. Before the Yankees got Reggie, and the next year they won the next 2. But those guys that you mentioned, those are some great memories. I read a book about Dick Enberg about 3 years ago, and it was a really, really good book. It really was. The guy was an amazing announcer.
And still, in his later years has been unbelievable. He went back to his roots, and he became a Padres play-by-play man. The thing that I remember most about Scully and Enberg was their versatility. They were baseball guys at the core, but Scully for CBS and Enberg for NBC did countless other things. Enberg, he was on Olympic broadcasts, NFL. Remember Dick Enberg partnering with Merlin Olsen on NFL games? They were incredible. Vince Scully was a voice of PGA Tour golf for me when I was a kid. He was an incredibly versatile broadcaster too.
And then
Scully
Enberg
could do
did
it all.
UCLA basketball. Back in those golden days of John Wood.
He also did tennis too. Dick Enberg did tennis.
Absolutely.
I wanted to come broadcast. I was of course a big Lobo fan, but I remember listening to him do UCLA, and I remember when the streak was over against Notre Dame and his great call at the end. It's all over, gosh! And you got goosebumps. You did, because UCLA had won how many? 67 straight. I can't remember exactly, but the call at the end, I never forgot it. And that guy was, you mentioned it, just iconic, an iconic announcer. When he's on. Oh my, right? His little trademarks. Oh my. and so when he's on with Merlin Olsen, right? I mean, what a team that they made on the NFL for years. So the guys that you're mentioning, I grew up with too, because I was a huge NFL fan. I still am. So yeah, I listen to all those guys.
So the thing about Robert. So we moved to Albuquerque in 1960, but in the late 50s, we lived in a little town called Henrietta, Oklahoma, and we would sit out on the porch and we would pick up the St. Louis broadcasts of Jack Buck and Harry Caray back in the late 50s. And if you never heard Harry Caray at his prime, he was a great broadcaster with Jack Buck. And I would be sitting out there on the porch, and we would get the signal from St. Louis was so strong.
KMOX?
Yes, KMOX. Yeah. And boy, I listened to that. And then we moved to Albuquerque. And then we picked up the Dodger broadcast. It was on 50,000. I forgot the station in L.A., but you could pick it up in Albuquerque at night. And that's when I started listening to Vince Scully. So I had the liberty to get used to Harry Caray and Jack Buck, and then Vince Scully. And then you could pick up the Angels broadcast when Enberg was doing the broadcast. Yeah.
He was unbelievable. And, you talked about the signal in St. Louis. I remember during my minor league days, spent a couple of seasons with the AA Brewers team in Huntsville, Alabama, the Stars.
Right.
And was lucky enough to go to the fourth game of the '04 World Series. That was the Red Sox and Cardinals, and not a good day. My family's roots are in St. Louis. We lived there until I was 4, so whenever I go back there, I'm a tourist. I don't remember anything about it because I was so young. But because my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a huge Cardinals fan, going back to the Gas House Gang days, I was also a Cardinals fan. I get a lot of grief from some of my close friends about having so many baseball teams that I root for, and I just tell them, how lucky am I, right, that I have so many that I can cheer for. But I remember the trip from Huntsville, Alabama, which is northern Alabama. It's very close to the Tennessee border, in Nashville, driving from there to St. Louis to go to Game 4. And we could pick up Cardinals talk radio. We were listening in like multiple states. The Cardinals are big in Arkansas and all these areas.
Oklahoma.
It's incredible. I had no idea really the extent of it until we made that drive, and we were listening to Cardinals sport. They were talking Cardinals baseball on all sports talk stations every single step of the way.
Yeah, that is awesome.
You know, when I was a kid in Oklahoma, the only thing you saw was Mickey Mantle uniforms, because everybody loved Mickey because he was from Commerce, Oklahoma. But everybody was Cardinal fans because the Cardinals broadcast, everybody, you could get it so clear at night, even in little towns all over the Midwest. And you talk about Arkansas. Harry Caray's a legend in Arkansas.
I think there's a Mantle statue, along with many others, surrounding the ballpark in Oklahoma City.
Yeah,
commemorating half dozen or so of the great Oklahoman big leaguers. It's
Johnny Bench,
yeah.
Bobby Mercer, and of course Warren Spahn.
Spahn was the first one I thought of. Yep.
And you know the thing about it is that I grew up listening to baseball. It was a way to keep the family together. My dad would have popcorn. We sit out on the porch on a hot summer night, and the broadcast on the radio, and you sit there and listen to the game. And you know, I when I started listening to the Cardinals, I thought Sportsman Park, that's where the Cardinals was playing. I thought it was the Taj Mahal, the way Harry Carey described the baseball park. So in 1950, my dad and I went to a Cardinal game to go see Stan the Man Musial. And when I got to the ballpark, I was disappointed. It was a beat-up old ballpark. No wonder they tore it down. But I had it in my mind, it was the greatest ballpark in the world, Sportsman Park.
Because of the pictures that Caray painted for you.
On the radio.
Yeah.
And that's why I admire you and Ed, because you paint a picture on the radio. That's what's the beauty of doing a radio broadcast. Am I right?
No question. Don't you agree, Ed?
Well, you know, I told Marty this, you know, how many innings have I spent up there alongside you as a PA guy? You know, countless innings, right? Countless innings. And you know, you're great at your craft because you prepared. Yeah, I tell everybody, you got your stats taped down, you got the monitor. And I think what's amazing to me is, and I listen, I'm right next to you. So, you know, I listen to everything you say, is you'll say this, got him on a high backdoor heater, struck him out 2 weeks ago on a backdoor slider in Colorado Springs. And I'm thinking to myself, man, you know, that's filling it up, right? That's filling it up because there's lots to talk about. You've got no color guy. It's just you. So you've got a lot of work to do, and it always amazes me how you keep the broadcast going and flowing. I talked to Ray Birmingham before the game, pitching coach Ken Hockamy. I can't remember his last name.
Yeah, Hockamy.
Ken Hockamy.
Yeah.
You know, we talked
Dan
about that,
Spencer
and so
before,
you'll mention all those things, and to me, those things add to a broadcast. You know, and again, I'm learning too, because if you can't learn from listening, right? I learned from a lot of different people. So, like I said, I've spent at least 100 innings up there with you, right? At least.
For sure.
So, and I've always had a great time, and I think I've learned more about my craft by listening to you when you do your base. It's just amazing. And I've told people that. I said, you've had to see it for yourself. You take no chances because the wind at Santa Ana Star Field could kick up at any time. So you got your stuff taped down no matter what, right? You got your markers. You don't think I'm taking note, Robert. I have. You have to understand those things, right? And learn and get better.
You mentioned the pitching coaches. The current one is Brandon Higland. Higgy is amazing. Of course, Ray Birmingham, the head coach. And that hits on something, Marty, that to me it's the single most important thing that I do, whether it's basketball, football, baseball, whatever. And you're hitting on it, Ed. It's the 2 hours before the game where I'm around the guys and talking with them. And I want to know what Harry Fullerton was thinking during the at-bat when he hit the home run over the batter's eye in dead center in the home opener when they beat Northern Colorado 7-6, and it was his first home run as a Lobo. You know, the Aussie outfielder. I want to know what he was thinking through the whole at bat, and then that helps me understand how he attacks a plate appearance. And the next time, you know, that he comes up the next day, I can talk about his at bat when he hit his first home run as, you know, a Division I college baseball player in detail. And those are the kinds of things that I think are the separators. You can have his average, his height and his weight, his RBI total, his on-base percentage, and all those things are right in front of you, and anybody can see that and look that up. And they're important to convey, but it's the stuff that you get directly from them, and it's the developing a rapport with them and having them trust you to give you the kinds of tidbits and little vignettes that, you know, really bring the color, the vibrant color to the broadcast. That's the most important thing.
Well, I think it's, you know, the Sporting News used to say to see a different game, right? See, that was their thing, their moniker. I love the Sporting News. I got it for years. But it's feel a different game with the players, right? Because you have to get that, feel it. You have to. I do that at Western. I have to talk to the players. I played basketball, you know, and so I talk to the football players. What did you feel like when you made that catch? What were you thinking? Things like that. And I think people forget sometimes the feel of it. And I think a lot of times in your baseball broadcast, it just comes out because of the conversations you have every game before the game. Those things are so important because I'm like, I got my ear bent. I mean, there's no other choice. I'm right next to you. So some of these stories, I'm like, whoa, okay, yeah, you know, because that's really filling it up, and people don't get it unless they understand all the work that goes behind it. And it's a lot of it. It really is. And again, I really admire your work, and I'm not saying this to gas you up, Rob. I'm not. I mean, I learn from people like you, and I don't think I'm trying to get better.
I can hear the passion in your voice, and Marty, that's why you're so good at what you do, because you have it. It's right here, and you want to learn, you want to grow, and your interest level is what makes this show so much fun. And everything you touch, everybody, they can feel that passion, really.
So, you know, let's get back to preparation. I go to Arizona to go see the Dodgers in the last couple of years of Vince being on the broadcast. And I was always amazed when you listen to Vince Scully, hey, did you know his mother makes a good apple pie? And by the way, when he was in Cub Scouts, he got his medal badge or something. And I'm going, this is amazing. So I go to spring training, and I go to the Dodgers, and I said to Fred Hoiberg, I'm just going to go follow Vince Scully, see what he does. And I'm going around, and he's talking to everybody. He's making notes, he had a yellow pad. He had notes on everybody. He asked them about their grandparents. He knew every player. And then by the time the season starts, he had the book on everybody. And of course, then he goes back to his memory of years ago. And when you listen to Vince Scully, you talk about artistic broadcast. I can't amaze. That guy was in Cub Scouts. His mother loves apple pie. And you're going, wow, this is them. Oh, by the way, he just hit a double.
Yeah, no, he's incredible. I thought about this because I knew you were going to ask me about Vince Scully. I think contextualizing is such an important thing. John Chalesnik is a guy that I listen to in sports talk radio in Southern California. He was on the Mighty 690 in the San Diego area. Lee Hacksaw Hamilton was an incredible sports talk guy who had a shtick that was all his own. And John talks about contextualizing all the time. He's gotten into a different aspect of broadcasting now. He helps young broadcasters find their way into the industry. And John and I have been friends for a long time, since the 90s. Anyway, I bring him up because, to me, that's what another piece of the art of Vince Scully. He had an understanding of time and the significance of what was happening in its place in history, like nobody that's ever done it. And he could do the famous broadcast of a Koufax perfect game at Dodger Stadium, where he used the clock so artfully to basically take you bit by bit, piece by piece, moment by moment through one of the greatest games ever pitched, right? And it's an iconic broadcast. I love to go back and listen to it just to remind myself of his greatness, of Vince Scully's greatness. And it's there for you to see any day you want. Is go find For Love of the Game and put it in and watch that movie and listen to him take Kevin Costner's character through his incredible performance against the Yankees in this fictional, portrayal, right? And I was so lucky. One day during my 7 years with the Isotopes, Kevin Costner sat with me for, several innings on the air in the booth at Isotopes Park. And I asked him about Scully and working with Vince Scully and what it was like to have Vince Scully, doing the play-by-play of his, Kevin's performance, right? And he said he told an amazing story. And the long and short of it was, how is that scripted? Where he said there was no script. He said the director tried to give Vince Scully some direction on how to do this, and Vince Scully said, "No, I read the story. I'm ready to go. Just roll." And he didn't have a script. He just did it, and he put. And it was all about time. It was all about father time catching up, and it made me think of the Koufax, perfect game, and I just it's the pinnacle of what we aspire to in this industry. That's who Vince Scully is.
And then on the other side of it is Harry Caray. And I got to meet Harry Caray at the end of his career at Harry Caray's restaurant, and Steve Stone was with him. And I went up to Harry Caray and I said, "What's the key to this whole thing?" And he says, "Son, we're in the entertainment business. We're here to entertain. Don't forget it. Don't take yourself too serious. I don't take myself serious, but we're here to entertain people." I'll never forget that.
Amen. I try to make sure that, and Ed, you can appreciate this because, games can get long. I try to make sure that the listener can hear the smile in my voice all the time.
Right. That's important.
How happy I am to be there at that stadium on that day, regardless of what the score is, and how lucky we are to be able to get to do what we do.
That's absolutely true. It's a kick every time I get to put the headsets on. You're absolutely right.
So we got to wrap it up. We're going to come back to the second segment, talk about some history of broadcasting. And boy, I'm having fun on this conversation. So folks, we'll be right back after our commercials here. All right, we're back here at segment 2, and boy, we're having a good time. I've got the voice of the Lobos, Robert Portnoy, the voice of Western New Mexico, Ed Nunez, my co-host, and I've got a Harry Caray story that I think it's just the funniest thing I ever saw. Now, I got to see Harry Caray at the end of his career, but I remember at the end he was having a hard time memorizing some of the players. It was like, what is he, 80 years old when he died, right? Was he?
Robert? No, he was up there.
And I remember Marty Brenneman was doing the broadcast on TV, and radio, and he made a comment to Harry's through, and actually they pushed him out of town. Now I just read in the paper Marty's is on suspension right now because of what he said about, I guess, a gay person or something like that.
There was Tom Brenneman that's on suspension.
Yeah, Tom Brenneman.
That's his son Tom.
Yeah, and so, but people got so upset with Tom Brenneman that he kind of got out of town because you just didn't criticize Harry Caray, no matter how bad he was at the end. People still love watching him. But I remember one game, it was one of those typical Cubs games where they're getting beat like 15-3, and so in about the fifth inning, how they always showed a shot out there in the bleachers, and there was this young couple making out in the bleachers out there in left field, and Harry said, "Well, those lovebirds they love each other," and then about the seventh inning, they go back and the same couple's making out in the same place, and Harry says, "Are they getting married or what?" And then in about the ninth inning, the camera goes back and they're still making out, and Harry says, "You know what, folks? She's kissing him on balls, and he's kissing her on strikes."
Wow!
And I don't know how he got away with that, but that's a Harry Caray. Like you say, it was all entertainment. And when Harry died, Robert, I was out there. There was 20-some thousand people. People put their Budweiser bottles out there on the street. They love Harry. He was a legend, and I don't know if there's ever going to be a guy like him again. But that's
Is "Holy Cow" the single most iconic call of all?
Oh gosh,
Is that number one?
The home run. It could be. It is home run. Oh my God, and then the holy cow, and then Rizzuto used it too. The scooter for the Yankees, he used it. So yeah, no, he was iconic in so many different ways. And then the seventh inning stretch, when he's singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." I mean, like you said though. Marty's right. It all was about entertainment, and who entertained better than Harry Caray? I don't know anybody that did, honestly.
And I think a lot of broadcasters, sometimes when I watch them, they're not as entertaining. They should be, especially when a game's like 7-1, 6-1. You got to keep the flow going, right? You've been through a lot of those type of games.
Yes, big time. At Isotopes Park, at Santa Ana Star Field. Those games can get out of hand. It can happen the way the wind blows and with the thin air and the way the ball carries and scores get up there.
Okay,
I probably wouldn't want to go back and count the number of times I've seen a position player pitch because pitching staffs were destroyed, right?
Okay, now I got another Robert Portnoy story, though, about being out there at Santa Ana Star Field, because you're right. Some of those games can go 5 hours, right? Now, there's a collective groan in the press box when there's a pitch. Everyone's like, oh, right? And you're right. So, but I asked you one time this. Now, you don't drink water, man, okay? Now, any broadcast I have to have moisture. I have to. Right? So I asked you one time, Rob, man, you don't drink no water? He's like, well, Ed, man, the bathroom's like 50 feet away. and I was amazed because it's like a 4-hour game and Robert Portnoy's drinking no water. I'm here gulping, right? And after the game, I'm practically running because, sometimes those games, one game went 5 hours. And like I said, there's a collective groan every time, Ray Birmingham comes out. It was like, oh, man. Yeah. There's some other things said that we can't say here. But, Rob, I don't know how you do it, man. I don't know how you do it.
It literally, there's not enough time to get out of that press box and get down to the restroom and get back up there in the 1-minute commercial break. So
it's not like broadcasting from the Isotope Park.
Once you're up there, you're up there.
Oh man. It's and some of those times, I've had it before like this. We're kind of like, oh man, 5 hours one game, 5 hours, and you've probably been there for longer.
Oh yeah, no.
So let's talk about the history of Lobo broadcasting. And so the first guy that comes to my mind is Connie Alexander. Now, if folks don't know who Connie is, he was the first voice of the Lobos back in the early 50s, and he was the voice of the Albuquerque Dukes. He was broadcasting the Dukes game at 19 years old. And his first broadcast with the Lobos when he was 21. And that's how he learned the craft. And he went to school, Albuquerque High and UNM. And then around 1962, he got the gig as the voice of the Southwest Conference. At that time, it was the Humble Broadcast. Now it's Exxon that owns Humble. But he did all the great games. He did the game of the century between Arkansas and Texas, 1969. And then he did a lot of bowl games. He did like 15 Cotton Bowl games. He did Liberty Bowl, but he was and then in the early days of television, he did those TVS Game of the Week with NBC, and he was partnered up with Dick Enberg. That's how and then he did some games with Jack Buck. But the most famous story was I think it was in the early 60s, he did a Liberty Bowl, and Harry Caray him and Harry did the broadcast from the Liberty Bowl. Harry in those days did the Cardinals games, but he did Missouri football and basketball. People didn't know that. Everybody thinks of Harry as the baseball broadcaster. So they're in the booth for the Liberty Bowl, and then at halftime they get a call, and the guy and Connie picks up the phone and says, "Who is this?" And he says, "This is Elvis. I need to talk to Harry." And Connie says, "I've got a call from Elvis for you, Harry." And Harry talks to him, and Elvis invites Connie and Harry to his house after the game for ribs and beer. And so they walk down the elevator, and then the limousine picks them up, and they spend a whole night partying with Elvis and Harry Caray and Connie Alexander. What a story that is.
That's a great story.
Wow.
It really is.
I wanted to mention something about Connie. I got to the market, the Albuquerque market, for the first time. It was 2006. And Connie was nice enough to, when we first met, he initiated, essentially. I didn't know who he was. I had not met him before. He had heard about, my coming to Albuquerque. And he initiated our first meeting. We happened to be at an event together. And he gave me some great advice when I first got here about resonance and how to improve the way your voice sounds over the air, and the things that he did to improve that in his voice. It prompted me. My oldest daughter is a singer. She talked to me about her voice coach, and then I decided to go to her voice coach because of how much my daughter said that she helped her with her breathing.
Right.
It was incredible. I learned things that I had no idea about, and how to really expand your lungs and be able to control pitch and things like that. And Connie was a huge influence. He probably doesn't even realize it, but yeah.
So
and I maybe never told him. I did tell him, but I wish I had made more of a point of it. I did thank him. He was really influential.
So when he died, he left 173 hours of recordings to the Zimmerman Library. Now, he used to talk about, my mom was a professional actress, and he and I talked about voice variation, when to raise your voice at the right time and when to bring it down in a broadcast. Because there's times when guys just stay so high the whole game, and he learned the art of voice variation. And that's what they do on stage. A great actor and actress has to learn how to control their voice. It's like what Rob was talking about. Now, he left 173 hours. It's a recording. You can go to the Zimmerman Library and listen to it. And he has all of his famous broadcasts, even the great the game of the century between Arkansas and Texas, 1969. And if I told young broadcaster, if you want to learn something, go to the library and just listen to those tapes. Those are just, and he has tapes with Harry Caray, Dick Enberg and him, Jack Buck, some classic stuff. And so if you're a young broadcaster, why wouldn't you go to the Zimmerman Library and just sit there and listen to his broadcasts? It's there right now.
What a resource.
No question.
That is amazing.
And so what happened is he gets the job at the Southwest, the voice. So who comes in? Frank Joyce. Now, I think Frank Joyce was a great broadcaster, but he got involved with hunting and fishing. He did a hunting and fishing show, but he was a good broadcaster. But what makes Frank Joyce famous? In 1947, July 7th, he's the DJ and he's running a radio station in Roswell. And his wife, he's from Roswell, New Mexico. He gets a call from a rancher outside named Max Brazel. Brazel calls him up and he said, "Look, I've got something. I got some, I think a flying saucer, some rubbish, and there's this little green man there dead." And he tells, and this is, now how I know this story is I got to talk to Frank Joyce before he died. And he told me the story. He gets a call, and all of a sudden, Frank writes up the press release and sends it over to the base. And they actually announced, and that's when they announced the flying saucer was cut. And then that night, he gets a call from I don't know if it's a CIA. There wasn't a CIA in those days, but somebody came in and told him, "You got to cut the story out. The story now is it's a balloon, And then then the next day they send Brazel to the radio station. And they make Brazel come up with the same story. It was just a balloon, But anyway, and then about 12 hours later, somebody from the government said, "If you ever talk about this again, you might not have a radio career at all." And so he kept his mouth shut for all those years. And the only reason he came out talking about it was because I think he was in his 80s when he died. And he just said, I got nothing. They're not going to throw me in jail. But that's the story. So, and Frank Joyce was there the day of the Roswell crash in 1947. Isn't that a great story?
That's history.
That's history.
Yeah.
And so he became the broadcaster till 1966, and then they found this guy from Farmington. But Mike Roberts was doing stuff up in Wyoming. He did a lot of it, but his last gig before he got the Lobo was the voice of the Farmington Scorpions. And he comes on, and then they made the transition. And I think Mike became full time in 1967. And of course, he became, how many years did he broadcast? 40-some years,
At least, yeah.
More than 40. And the thing about Mike Roberts, I was with him on his last broadcast. He was on 101.7 FM. He was doing the high school game, and I was up there with ProView up in the booth up at Community Stadium, and I got to go see his last broadcast, and I gave him a hug. And boy, everybody was in tears. And I think he died, 6 months later?
Wasn't much longer. There's a couple of things I want to say about Mike. I grew up listening to him as a Lobo fan. I'm a Lobo fanatic. Been a fan since '70 of the football team and the basketball team. So I'm a fan. That's all we have here, right? So I'm a fanatic, and I'm listening. Mike is the voice. And so, again, on the radio, football, basketball, and the biggest Lobo homer you ever saw, right? I still remember Bobby Dobler's going to call that amazing. The biggest Lobo homer you ever saw, right? Right in his perch there. You've got a different seat now, Robert, from where Mike sat. Mike had his perch. The thing about Mike, all due respect to Mike, he's an icon. He's iconic. He didn't want a color guy, right? Now, Joe O'Neill served as his color guy for a few years. Joe O'Neill, the president of 1017. And I always remember, I know Joe, we played ball against each other in high school. So I'm kind of bending my ear a little bit to see more what Joe might be able to say.
Joe was at Siebel and you were at
Highland.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, Joe gets a few words in, right?
Right.
And Mike just rolls over like, all right, back to, all right. And Mike, he was like Chick Hearn. They didn't want that color guy. They didn't think it'd fit in. Mike later, he grew with it, right? But at first, he wants no color guy. It's just Mike Roberts. One more story is I was hosting 1017 the locker room for Joe. And I have to remote out to Mike out at Wilson Stadium. And I'm nervous anyway. It's Mike, man, right? I'm nervous. So, Mike, you got number 1, Manzano gets number 2, LaCueva out there at Wilson. If you talk to the coaches. And Mike says, well, Ed, that's what I was going to say. You stole my thunder. And I'm like, oh. And I just kept rolling. But I'm like, oh, gosh, I don't want to make Mike mad. But that is a story that I never forgot.
Well, 101.7, the team, right?
Yes.
I spent a good period of time with Joe there. And obviously now Lobo baseball since February 2013 I've been doing on 101.7, the team. But when the station started up in 08, Joe said, we're going to do an afternoon talk show. We came up with the name The Locker Room, and the first year I was his host, and Mike was the coolest you could possibly imagine, because Mike was Joe's primary play-by-play guy at that time. He was doing all of the high school sports, football and basketball. He did the tournament marathons from the pit. It was all Mike, and we worked together. I interviewed him so many times, and he could not have been more supportive. And I appreciated what he did in his passion about his craft and how much he still loved it at that stage in his career. And he was so helpful to me too. And the legend of Mike getting incorrigible as he got older.
Right.
You do something for so long, you get set in your ways, and I totally understand that. But he could not have been, nicer to me. And yes, there were times where Mike wanted things a certain way, but I loved him, absolutely loved him.
So here's the thing. Here's my memory, Mike Roberts, for the rest of my life. In 1985, I become the branch manager in San Diego for Pitney Bowes Corporation. So I'm on Friars Road. And so I started hanging out the beach, Mission Beach, Pacific Beach, La Jolla, and I would sit there in a fall night, go down to the beach, have a nice cold one, sit there on the patio, turn on the radio, and I would get KOB crystal clear. And I'd be sitting there listening to the broadcast of the Lobos. And of course, that happens today for you, Robert, because if you're sitting at Mission Beach, they're hearing you at night.
Isn't that incredible?
And I'm sitting there at Mission Beach with these girls in bikinis, and we're sitting there and we're listening to Lobo Sports. And this one guy said, "Who is that guy?" And I say, "He's the voice of the Lobos, Mike Roberts." And we're sitting there with the waves coming in, and you just got to picture this. I'm sitting there with a Pacifica beer or something, and I'm listening to Lobo football or Lobo basketball. And a nice evening in the wintertime is nice in San Diego. And
Think about that, 50,000 watts still. I think of KNBR 680 out of the Bay Area is another one. Those blowtorches, how old that technology is and how relevant it still is, really. I mean, I know a lot of people consume their radio now online, off their phone or through an app or whatever, right? But still, the fact that that's the case, that the San Francisco Giants broadcast on the right night, you can hear them here in Albuquerque.
Right. And so can you imagine, I didn't miss Lobo Sports because I heard it on KOB, and thank God we had KOB, 50,000 watts. So we've got to wrap this up for a third segment, but boy, I want to say, for people who didn't know Mike Roberts, God bless you, Mike. We miss you today.
Amen.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, we're back to segment 3. I've got Ed Nunez, the voice of Western New Mexico Mustangs. Of course, he works for ProView Networks. I've got Robert Portnoy, the voice of the Lobos. And, of course, great baseball announcer. I guess you're like you're a 3-tool baseball player. You can do everything, right?
I feel so fortunate to get to do 3 sports with the Lobos. That was something that was really important to me when they asked me to be the voice of the Lobos, is can I continue to do Lobo baseball? And they said, absolutely. And so sign me up. It's just been awesome.
So right now, this is going to be difficult for me because we're not going to have Lobo football right now, and it's going to be the first time probably in 105 years there's no fall football for the University of New Mexico, and it's going to and not have a game on the radio. God, I don't know. You know, I know that the Big 12, the ACC, the SEC, they're going to try to pull it off, and we'll see. I hope they make it, but I get the feeling that if the virus goes crazy on campus, they'll probably shut it down. But I guess they're going to make an effort, right, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, nobody has a crystal ball. It was so interesting to see the way the different conferences fractured, right? And it would have been, it's hindsight's 2020 always, but somehow, some way, wouldn't have been awesome if they could have gotten together. You're talking about 5, power conferences and 5, the group of 5, right? Why couldn't they figure out a way to do something as a collective so that we could have a football season potentially where everybody's playing at the same time? I mean, it's really going to be strange if those conferences pull it off, play in the fall, and then the others figure out somehow how to play a spring season that starts maybe in January or February, something like that. Or who knows, maybe even sooner. Maybe they try to get it, ramped up in December. But that would be incredible to have really 2 football seasons. How's that going to work? What's it going to look like? Yeah.
I think that's a good question. I think the other question I have is they expect a spike in October. We're still not out of this one yet. And I just don't know what's going to change by January with vaccines available. I know that we talked about different ways to treat it. Hopefully they'll find different ways to test. Hopefully in January we're having a different conversation, because right now, and Jimmy Tran, our producer, alluded to that. Right now, it's to the point where the infections people are going to get infected, right? They're good. It seems like that way anyway. But the good news is most of these infections that I've seen, I haven't seen, or they haven't said that any college kid has gotten seriously ill or died. So that's good. But it's a roll of the dice, Robert. There's no question about it. It's a roll of the dice.
Well, the fear, I think, that came from the revelations about myocarditis with regard to a player in the Big Ten, that precipitated such a dramatic shift in the direction of things, over 1 week's time, right? There was, it came out that we had a date set. I think it was September 26th is when they were going to try and start the season, and a week later, several conferences decided not to have a fall season, and that was the one big change, right, in that time frame, was the revelations about potential long-term effects of having COVID. So there's so much to unpack there, and it's so far over my head I can't even begin. But
and there's the guy from the Boston Red Sox came down with it. They shut him down. The pitcher, same thing he had. But here's my thinking: the people I've talked to in Texas and Oklahoma, I've talked to some people in the athletic department, and I've talked to people who's the athletic director for high schools in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. Football is such a part of their culture on Friday nights. It's a psychological thing. They don't want that. They're playing football next week. The Henrietta Hens are playing the Chickasha Chicks. The Hens versus the Chicks. Somebody's going to lay a big egg in that football game.
Yeah, no pun intended, right?
Right.
For sure.
And the psychology in the South, because football is a religion. You know that, Ed. Mm-hmm. Especially in Texas. The fact that they're going to be playing high school football next week in El Paso, Birches versus El Paso Austin, right down the road from Las Cruces, and we're not playing football. And it's such a big psychological thing. And they're thinking right now, from the people I talk to, they're going to wait it out. They're going to go as far as they can. And if it gets that bad, they'll probably shut it down. But they're going to try and make an effort to play football, even there's very few people in the stands. But that's what, and in states like Oklahoma, you know how people in Alabama and Mississippi feel about high school football? Come on. Can you imagine shutting football down in what's the town, Midland, Odessa? No way.
They had a great article in the Journal last week about Artesia and Cooper Henderson in their 29 state championships, them not playing football, and what a blow it's been to that town economically. They get ready for Bulldog football on Friday nights. That's what they live for. Bulldog Bowl, the whole, like Marty mentioned. So it is, and I think the other thing, Robert, is the effect it has on kids mentally.
That's what I was thinking, Ed.
Yeah, Orlando Griego, the Rio Grande baseball coach, has mentioned that. He wants to be together with his kids because, and he's not the only coach, right? I talked to Phil Lovato at Highland today, the football coach, and psychologically it's hard. Hey, I was an athlete. I played basketball. I lived for that, right? I wish I had done better in academics. I wasn't dumb. It's just I was always thinking about when's the next game? When are we playing? And so I think psychologically it definitely is a big psychological effect. So I pray and hope, I do, that things can get going in January. And Marty and I talked about this on one of our shows. Not just athletes, right? The band teacher, the DECA teacher, the history teacher, the connection we have with teachers at school, period, right? Because they have a huge influence on my life, and I bet they have on yours and Marty's as well.
So so Robert, that's why they're not shutting it down. But I don't know if I'm thinking maybe they get through 3-4 games, and what happens in late October, the whole thing just blows out. They're probably going to have to shut it down. Am I right, Robert?
Well, I think that it goes to something that Ed said a short while ago. If something serious were to happen, that would be the sort of event, the precipitating event, right? That would result in that happening. Is
right.
if somebody got seriously ill, and you hope and pray that doesn't happen. And the psychology of it, Ed, I agree with you 100% on that. The kids need it, and it's not just the athletes, but what Friday nights mean to the whole student body, and what those and knock on wood, man, we sure hope that basketball happens and maybe even happens on schedule. It's a pick me up for the whole school, right? And it's a gathering place. It means a lot. Not just to the players, but to all the students.
Right, the community at large. We mentioned that, and what are the effects there? And we'll have to see what happens.
So can you imagine South Bend, Indiana? And I've gone to a bunch of Notre Dame games back when I lived in Chicago. When the big event, when the Fighting Irish the band comes out of that tunnel, and they have the Irish Guard. They wear the Scottish outfit, the Irish Guard, and they come on the field playing the fight song, one of the greatest fight songs of all time, the Notre Dame fight song. That is the big thrill. The people in South Bend, they live for that. The people live for Notre Dame football. That's why Notre Dame is going to try to play it out, because it means so much. Can you imagine the last time Notre Dame hasn't played in the fall was in 1891 or something like that? So can you imagine the tradition of New Rockney, all the great coaches there,
It speaks to the concerns about potential long-term health problems for 18 to 22-year-old student athletes, right, that the chancellors and presidents of a conference like the Big Ten, where football at Ohio State and Michigan is about the same as what Notre it is, Dame. At Notre Dame, and what it is at Auburn and Alabama, and for them to make the decision that they made, the concerns were huge.
What I'm going to say is this, and I think you're absolutely right. These decisions weren't made lightly. There's billions of dollars at stake here, right? So it wasn't as if they all got together, they talked to the doctors, the epidemiologists, they all got together and had that conversation, and it wasn't done lightly. And so I agree with you there, and I think the heart condition thing, if that hadn't happened, the effects on, they said, obese guys on the line, right? The bigger guys on the line. They were worried about that. And there was also, I saw this on Real Sports on Brian Gumbel's show, they wanted some of these players to sign waivers that if they got COVID, it was on them. And it's like, wait a minute. You can't do that, right? So you're saying it's not a threat, but it's a threat. And if it's a threat, you take care of it yourself. You can't do that. So that's why that's why eventually they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. Now, some things are bigger than sports, and it took a guy that I love him. I report for 99.9 The Beat. I'm on the radio twice a day doing a Sports Minute. So I live for sports, right? We all kind of do. But some things, to me, are a little bit bigger than sports, and health and safety of participants is huge.
So what's going to happen with the NFL, Robert? They're going through, big money's at stake. The players know it, big salaries. What do you think is going to happen in this NFL season? You think they're going to get through the season?
I do. I mean, I can't imagine that they could have obstacles any bigger than what Major League Baseball confronted on the front end of their restart, right? And now the travel for Major League Baseball is going to be even tougher than it is for the NFL, right? Those guys are only on the road for 2 or 3 days at most, and they get in and get out of a city, right? Whereas baseball is a little bit different. You're spending more time, and we saw what happened with the Marlins, the Cardinals, the Reds, now the Mets, the most recent team. They haven't shut down. They've made it through. They've gotten all those teams back on the field. I think the Mets are about to get back on the field, right? So I can't imagine that they'll go through a worse blow than what happened. I mean, the Marlins were, what was their record? 2-1 or something? 2-2 and other teams had played 15, 16 games. So I think they'll figure it out. Yes, I really do. I think they'll figure it out.
Well, you're right, Ed. They have charter airplanes, so they're not going to. The plane's going to be safe because they're going to go on charter. They're going to bus to the hotel. The hotel's going to be sprayed down, so they'll probably be in a bubble if they go on the road in an NFL game. Don't you think?
It's up to them, right? Once they get to their hotel, it's up to them to do the right thing.
Right.
Right?
That's right. Yeah.
It's that simple. If they go to a city where all the bars are open, it's going to be tempting.
Yeah, it's going to be very hard. We've seen the 2 Cleveland Indian pitchers went out. A couple of the Cardinals went to the casino, and we saw what happened after that.
And that reminds me, in the 1964 season, what's the Paul Hornung and what was the guy Max McGee, and they snuck out during during training, and they went out partying all night. And then, so the next day, and they come back to the hotel, and there's Vince Lombardi. Lombardi said, "You guys are fined $1,000, blah blah blah." Then the next night, they did it again, and Lombardi was there, and he fined them $1,000. He said, "Guys, if you do it tomorrow night, just call me. I'll just go with you. We'll just party together. If it's worth that kind of money, I'll just hang out with you."
Isn't it true, the legend about McGee being completely hungover in the Super Bowl?
It is. That is true.
Yeah,
that is true.
Yeah,
He wasn't expecting to play.
So
One of their receivers got hurt.
and he was a star in the game.
Yeah.
So Boyd Dowler started that game in the 67 game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Packers, and he gets hurt in the first quarter, and there's Max McGee hung over with Paul Hornung and whatever, but he goes out there and became MVP.
Unbelievable.
So,
that's one of my favorite NFL films of all time.
And so it's going to be interesting, but I just wish I understand where you're coming from. I just wish we would have played some fall football games, at least try to put it off. But I understand. I see both sides of the story. I'm more emotional for the football side.
I do too. I can see both sides of it too.
One
Absolutely.
quick question, Robert, before we wrap it up now. Danny Gonzalez is the new Lobo coach. I think he's going to do a great job here. He's from Albuquerque, coached under Rocky Long, also with Marvin Lewis and Herman Edwards. What great mentors those three must have been to him. What kind of job do you think he's going to do here? He's been very solid. We're just working to get stronger and quicker and faster. He's not really said too much. What kind of job do you think he's going to do? It's hard to say, but what kind of job do you think he's going to do here?
Great job. Little vignette from before the spring football practices were shut down. They got in half of their 15 practices. This is an example of what he brings to the table. To me, it's a perfect snapshot. A Lobo receiver dropped a pass in a drill, dropped a pass, groused about it, shoulders slumped, kicked the football, kind of, really, the body language was terrible as he walked from the upper practice field down to the lower practice field to pick up the football. Danny wasn't even with that group, that position group. He was on the other side of the field with the defense, but he saw it. He came running over, sprinting over, and got right up in the face of this player and said, "The next time that happens, you run and get that football. You take it back to the line of scrimmage and you get back in line and you catch the next one. I don't want to see ever negative body language like that. Get better. And how you think of yourself every day will define how you play on Saturdays." And I'm not going to have this on my practice field. The combinations of hustle, the psychology of positive thinking, he's got it all. He absolutely has it all.
Looking forward to it.
We're looking forward to it. And hey, listen, we're going to wrap this up. And I want to do a bonus segment, but we've got to get this segment wrapped up so we can get this on Channel 26. on one of our stations. So
It's been a treat, Marty. It's been a treat, Ed. Thank
Rob,
you guys.
thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Well, guys, welcome back for a bonus segment of American Talk It Up with Ed Nunez and Robert Portnoy. Now, I want to talk about some history, sports history. And you know I love sports history, and you know
You've got the best stories, Marty. The best.
There's only one guy that knows more than I do, and that's Jim Holtzman, for sure.
No, Coach Holtzman knows a lot.
He knows a lot, and I would never go up against Jim, but he's my idol for stories, right, Ed?
He's got a whole
everything.
bunch of them. He does.
And, and of course, Buddy Robinson's another one that knows a lot about stories.
Oh, he's a good man.
Famous
Gosh,
baseball coach.
He's a good man. I miss seeing him.
So here's the Stanford, New Mexico connection. Now, you went to Stanford, but back in 1924, the United States won. I'm wearing an Olympic shirt here, United States Olympic Rugby. In 1924, we won the Olympic gold medal in rugby. Right? And 9 of the players on that team were Stanford football players. And one of them was Dudley DeGroot, who became the Lobo football coach from 1950 to 52. In the 52 season, they go 7-2-1, and I think they were number 2 in the nation in defense. They held their opponents to 7 points. You have to look it up, Robert. I think they were number 1 or number 2. And Dudley DeGroot, now he played in a 1922 Stanford football team, but he didn't play in the 25 Rose Bowl game. But Norm Cleveland, who was from Santa Fe, he was born in Pie Town, New Mexico, and he was on that team, Norm Cleveland. Now, in that 1924 Stanford team that went to the Rose Bowl, and they played the Four Horsemen, Newt Rockne in 1925. And, the Four Horsemen, I think the guy I remember was Elmer London, was the big star for Notre Dame. And the big star for Stanford was Ernie Nevers. Have you heard of Ernie Nevers?
Of course. No.
So, in that season, 1924, Stanford goes undefeated with one tie. I think they tied Berkeley, the Cal Bears. But in the middle of the season, Ernie Nevers breaks his ankle. And so Norm Cleveland, this guy from New Mexico, was the backup running back, and he goes and leads Stanford to the Rose Bowl. And then 5 days before the Rose Bowl game, they took the cast off Ernie Nevers, and he played in that game. And Ernie Nevers was about 6'1", 200 pounds, but Jim Thorpe was 6'1", 200 pounds. And then, and of course, Thorpe was coached by Pop Warner, the Carlisle Indians. And of course, Pop Warner ended up coaching the Stanford Indians. In those days, they were the Stanford Indians. And in 1931, they named the top 4 college football players of all time. And they named Jim Thorpe, and then it was a tie between Ernie Nevers and Red Grange, the great Red Grange from Illinois. But they asked Pop Warner who was the greatest player he ever had. He said Ernie Nevers over Jim Thorpe. And they said, well, why? He said Ernie Nevers was a great leader, and he gave everything he had. Sometimes Thorpe took plays off, But that was the difference. But I think Thorpe was probably better, right, Robert?
Well, Thorpe was a better all-around athlete for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a legendary athlete, right? You have more Thorpe stories too. I know. I've heard them.
So here's the story about, and Dudley DeGroot, you look him up. He was the head coach. And by the way, in 1945, he was the head coach of the Washington Redskins. They won the NFL, and they lost to the Bears in the finals, 1945. And then he ended up coaching the Lobos. And the reason why he left the Lobos in 52 with the winning season is the athletic director decided to de-emphasize football. And at that time, one of the greatest athletes of all time, Tom McDonald, in the spring of 53, he was going to go play for the Lobos. And they all said he decided that I don't want to go here because they're de-emphasizing football. And that's how he went to Oklahoma University. But he was going to go here. And then DeGroot left. He left, and he ended up dying in San Diego County. I think he retired and died in 1970. But he was the head coach. But in that 1924 season for the Olympic Games, just so you know, in 1920, we won the gold medal there I think it was in Amsterdam. They had the 1920 Olympic Games. And just so you know, the reason why we were good at rugby, because in 1906, Robert, they dropped football. Remember Teddy Roosevelt, like 25 people died? You're talking about death. So they banned football for a while. And so all those high schools and those Catholic schools in the Bay Area, they started playing rugby. And all these guys were rugby players when they were young kids growing up. They're in the Bay Area. That's why we were able to put up the team. So in 1924, they wanted to defend their title, and they didn't have enough money, and they raised money, and they practiced there. You know where you do the tailgates for Stanford football, right? Those old rugby fields. You remember those places.
That's where they practice.
And so they didn't get it. So they raised money. They had fundraisers, and they finally.
I've had a few libations on those fields.
I have too. I played rugby 10s there. So here's the story. They finally get, and the guy who coached him was Alston Smith, a former Stanford football rugby. He was the coach. And so they get on a banana boat in Alameda. You know, the harbor there in Alameda. They got on some banana boat, and they got to Calais, France, the port of Calais, like a day before the Olympic Games, and they didn't know they were coming. They said they were coming, and all of a sudden they get on a train and they get to the Paris, the 1924 Olympic Games. And by the way, Chariots of Fire, that's where the movie 1924, the guy who didn't want to run on Sunday, it's the same Olympic Games, 1924. And so they get there to...
I can hear the song in my
No, me
head.
too. Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, the Chariots of Fire. They get there the day of the Olympic opening, and they didn't, and then they got them in the game. They had no place to stay. So one guy said, "You ought to show up. There's a restaurant bar down there in Paris. It's where all the American patriots hang out. Maybe they'll put you up." So they end up going to this bar, and you've heard the Lost Generation, the great writers, Ernest Hemingway. Mm-hmm. And of course, Scott Fitzgerald, and then Gertrude Stein, Pablo Picasso. They're all getting drunk or drinking, and these rugby players show up. We need a place to stay, and they put them up during the Olympic Games. And can you imagine staying with Ernest Hemingway, and of course, Scott Fitzgerald was with that crazy wife of his, Zelda, and he was writing that great Gatsby, the great, maybe one of the greatest novels of all time. Of course, Hemingway was in the works of writing Fareway to Arms, another great American novel, and they're all living in Paris. And can you imagine Pablo Picasso? Yeah. And so this would be a great movie, Robert, right? If somebody could write a script for this movie, a ragtag bunch of guys talking about David versus Goliath. This is it, right? And they made it to the finals, and they played the French, and they beat them 17-3, and it was a riot. And if you go back and Google the Paris riots, there's a story about the Olympic team created a riot because there was 40,000 French when this went crazy. They said we played too rough. We play like a bunch of football cowboys. That was the article in the Paris paper. And we were physical. Can you imagine? And there was the great...
too physical in rugby?
Oh, yeah.
Boo-hoo.
And what's incredible, this is in August of 24, and Norm Cleveland comes back and starts playing on that great Stanford team that played in the Rose Bowl.
So let me ask you, Marty, because I totally agree. Like, this is an American dream type of story. It really is. Are there enough people who can give us accounts of left from, that's a long time ago, because if you could flesh out the details of this story, I'm imagining this fantastic feature-length film, because they go on to win the gold medal. It's an American gold medal in rugby. There's so many, come on.
Well,
so many angles.
Yeah,
here.
They're putting back beverages with F. Scott Fitzgerald. Are you kidding me?
Ernest Hemingway.
Yes, it's ridiculous.
Why hasn't someone made a movie already?
It's obvious. This is a movie.
Right.
Yeah. So you're not going to believe this. Dudley DeGroot, his grandson, is a Hollywood producer. He does reality shows. Well, I'll have to give his name. You can look him up. He called me on the phone. He lives in North Carolina, but he has a house in Hollywood, and he does these reality shows. He's a producer, director. This is the grandson of Dudley DeGroot, who played in that. And so he's trying to put something together. See, the thing is, some of this, it would have to be a story where you can't act, because he said you got to have a woman in the show, romance and all that. It would probably be a little fiction, but it would be a good story.
That's fine.
Yeah.
No, let's embellish. That's okay.
Maybe some embellish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the New Mexico connection. Now,
loosely based on fact, right? Yeah.
so Norman...
Hollywood does it all the time, Robert. All the time.
So I'm at Norm Cleveland's house in Santa Fe, 1997, and he died at 90 years old, okay? And his mother was a Western writer. Her name was Agnes Cleveland. Look her up. She wrote all these Western, and she wrote the famous book on the Santa Fe Ring. Remember we talked about the Spanish land grant, and that's a thing that he and I are going to do a story on how these guys took the land away from the Spanish people, the land grants.
Right.
They call it the Santa Fe Ring. That's going to be a great story, a good podcast.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to hear that.
And so, but anyway, Norm Cleveland came out and watched the Aardvarks play back in '95, and he came out and I met the guy, and so I went up to see him, and he pulled out of his closet the gold medal. I actually saw the gold medal
Wow.
in his hand. And he left a lot of his stuff in the Santa Fe library, but he came back and lived his last days in Santa Fe. Now there's a guy who wrote a book on that Olympic Games. I have a copy of it. That's something I'm just going to read. But I always thought whoever writes a screenplay for this, what a great story! It'd be as good as Chariots of Fire, wouldn't you think?
Well, you got so many elements in there, and Robert, you mentioned you can embellish, Hollywood it up. Hollywood does it all the time. So there's so many things there. It would be a great story.
And can you imagine a banana boat from?
I was just thinking about that. Yeah, from Alameda Harbor to France. what that voyage must have been like.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
And all those Stanford kids and all those California boys. And the thing about it, when Norton said, when we were growing up, we played rugby because there was no American football. So it wasn't like a fluke. We won the Olympic Games in rugby.
We don't win that Olympic Games if Teddy doesn't shut down football.
We don't win it without Teddy
Think
Roosevelt.
about that. Think about that's another part you add in, right? That's another one, right?
And of course,
you can't miss that one.
And of course, the Roughnecks had their convention in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and Teddy was the first one there in the 1920s. So not 1912. So anyway, what a story! Of course, you're a Stanford grad. You would love this story.
Sign me up. I'll buy my ticket to see it. On the big screen.
Yeah, no kidding.
But here's my thinking. No, Stanford doesn't play the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame in the Rose Bowl if Norm Cleveland didn't come in with Ernie Embers breaks his ankle in the middle of the season and saved the day. He scored like 15 touchdowns, led Stanford to the Rose Bowl, but he didn't play in that game because Ernie Embers was the star. And the next year, Stanford goes 7-2. They didn't go to the Rose Bowl in 25, but in the 24th season, a boy from New Mexico saved the day for the Stanford Indians and Pop Warner.
And they don't get a shot at the Four Horsemen without the New Mexico connection.
New Mexico connection.
Yeah, incredible.
So anyway, that's our bonus segment. You got any other comments?
Love it.
That's a great story.
Fantastic.
Yeah, sure. I'm finding out more and more, Robert. This guy's got more stories than anybody I know. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I just love Stanford and some of those days, those big oak trees looking over the old stadium before they remodel the new stadium. What do you think of the new stadium being remodeled?
Oh, it's
beautiful.
fantastic. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, there were some great old games, though, with over 80,000 people in the original, Olympic stadium, right, with the track around it and the whole thing. Like Dan Marino lost his only Super Bowl there to Joe Montana. So.
Oh, what a story. 1984. San Francisco.
Boy, I played in this rugby tournament called the Rugby Tens. Every late November, I would go out and play on Stanford Field. Boy, I had some great times. It was a beautiful place. I envy you. I was a very good student. You must have been a straight A student. What was your ACT score, 36?
I didn't take the ACT. I did the SAT. I'll tell you what, the legend of it is a place where once you get there, they take care of you because, my gosh, I was so overwhelmed. Like the unbelievable people in that university, the student body and the thinkers, and oh my gosh, I felt like just in awe. I mean, it is a pretty amazing place.
Yeah, and it's one of the great schools of all time. It's like another school I always loved was Northwestern, but they didn't have the athletic tradition Stanford did. But
True.
But Stanford is the place to be, and boy, you're a lucky guy to go there.
Well, there's some. I mean, David Brody is one of the most renowned political scientists of generations. I learned about presidential elections from him. I mean, that's incredible. Like, for this upcoming election, there is one predictor over time that has been the single best one for presidential elections. Obviously, this is taking out, in terms of factoring out things that could influence an election, a catastrophic event, right? If all things are equal, the economy is the number one predictor. Philip Zimbardo was one of the psych professors. He is another. I mean, oh my gosh. I mean, I got to sit in lectures
And what's
from
the-
these
That's incredible.
people.
That
Yeah,
really is.
What's the lady that was the Secretary of State?
Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah, she's a professor there.
She was the provost when I was there. Yeah.
Some great people. Anyway, I thought this would be a good bonus segment. What a great story about Stanford and the Olympic Games and the 1925 Rose Bowl game. And
Too much fun.
Too much for me. So, hey, folks, if you liked listening to this show, America Talk It Up, go up to Facebook and hit like and follow, and go to YouTube and hit the subscriber. And we'll be putting this show on Channel 26 on Comcast. But, Robert, the good thing about history is, boy, they're great stories to listen to these old stories.
You never cease to amaze, Marty. And Ed, this is so much fun. You guys are having a blast. Keep it up.
This
Robert, thanks
broadcast,
again for showing up. I really appreciate it.
we
great
appreciate
being
it.
here. Thank
and
you.
what a great broadcast. This will go down as one of the great ones, right, Ed?
I sure hope so.
They're all terrific.
All
Thanks,
right.
man.